Adventure, survival, action, and some epic building. That's what's on the table with Keen Games' upcoming title, Enshrouded. Our team has poured over dozens of hours of trailers, gameplay, and dev blogs, and we're here to share everything you need to know before launch day. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and let's dive in to Enshrouded. Enshrouded is dropping into early access on January 24th, and by all accounts, things are shaping up well ahead of its launch. One thing we always look for when it comes to new games is just how much developers are pushing for the game to be out there ahead of its release, and in the case of Enshrouded, the team has already included it as part of multiple Steam demo opportunities with no restrictions on people playing, capturing, and sharing footage. In my mind, that is a big deal and enough of a reason to check out the game, so let's do just that. Enshrouded checks off a lot of boxes as far as genre is concerned. It blends together ideas of action, survival, open world, RPG, adventure, and sandbox. So let's get more specific about what the experience is like at the highest level. As far as the early game experience is concerned, Enshrouded is first and foremost an adventure sandbox game. You awaken from a strange chamber, and after a few short minutes, the world of Embervale unfolds before you. At this point, what you choose to do and where you choose to go is completely up to you. There is a journal, and that acts as your main quest, but you could choose to ignore that if you prefer to explore other aspects of the game first. What I think most players will immediately realize is that the world of Embervale is broken into two parts, at least within the first zone, which is what everyone had access to during the pre-launch demo. In the Highlands, you'll experience a relatively peaceful gameplay experience. You can set down roots by building a base, gather materials, and explore ruins and small encampments. You'll occasionally run into enemies, that's just part of the deal, but overall it's a more casual experience. Now on the flip side of that picturesque Highlands is the Shroud, zones spread across the map covered in a toxic fog and filled with tougher enemies and valuable resources and treasure. As you get acclimated to the world, you'll realize that to progress, you'll need to journey into the Shroud in order to cleanse the Shroud root corrupting the world. Defeating powerful bosses, claiming their loot, and clearing the Shroud is a temporary act, but a pivotal part of the game's progression and most likely endgame system. When you need a break from exploring the Shroud, you can return to your base and upgrade. Enshrouded features a voxel-based world, and that means Embervale itself is almost entirely destructible, giving players near endless control over the environment. As far as base building is concerned, this opens up the door for some incredible build potential, but more on that in just a bit. I think it's important to remember that Enshrouded is releasing into early access, so we shouldn't expect the game to be feature complete at launch. That being said, of what you've seen so far, what do you think? Be sure to leave us a comment down below if the game looks like something you would play. Now that we've got a 30,000 foot view of Enshrouded, let's take a closer look at some of the most important gameplay systems within the game, starting with gathering and crafting. From everything we've seen from gameplay so far, what's clear is that gathering and crafting should feel familiar to just about everyone, no matter their experience with survival games. Gathering is simple, with some items being interactable, while others require you to use a tool, such as an axe or pickaxe, to break them down into components. Where I think this is going to be a game changer for so many people is the ability to completely manipulate the world via gathering. Sure, you can harvest bushes and chop down trees, but you can also completely transform the world around you. That means leveling mountains and completely reshaping the land beneath you, and while that's common enough in block-based games, there's a fluidity to Enshrouded's destructible world that almost feels organic. This isn't a new idea. Other games have absolutely tapped into a similar system, but Enshrouded takes the idea furthest away from its blocky origins. On the crafting side of things, the loop is likewise pretty simple, with players inputting resources into various crafting stations and then waiting for the stations to output the materials. Depending on what items you're looking to craft will determine how long it takes for those orders to complete, but it's an automatic process. This is something I always enjoyed about games like Last Oasis, which we covered previously on the channel. It allows you to craft the items you need without locking you into a crafting animation, so you're free to go about your business while items cook away. One subsystem of crafting I really enjoy about the game is rooted in other games like Terraria and Conan Exiles, where players need to seek out NPCs within the world and bring them back to their bases. Providing them with shelter gives you access to that NPC's specific offerings, and in the case of the demo, players had access to the blacksmith, which opens up new crafting options, including full sets of armor. This is something I can see the team easily expanding on in the future, especially given that players will have access to all sorts of weapons, including wands and staves. It makes sense then that having other NPCs lean into the various sides of combat, not just physical, but magical as well. Truly, there's no limit to what the team can introduce utilizing this system, which is a good thing when you consider the long-term health of the game. As you might expect, all of these systems feed into the overall adventure game Enshrouded is laying out before players. Exploration and gathering leads to resources, which you then in turn use to craft more refined materials, which you can then use to craft better gear, only if you have the NPC sheltered within your base to unlock the crafting patterns. It's a relatively simple process, one we've seen before, but it's easy to understand, and so long as all the pieces work together, the developers can easily add on to or even expand the crafting and gathering in future content updates. On the other side of gathering and crafting is the building, which is intricately tied to crafting, let's not kid ourselves. All that chopping and mining not only provides you items to aid in progression, but also resources you can use to create. As I mentioned before, Enshrouded is a voxel game, and that means so much flexibility when it comes to building within the world. If you're someone that is meticulous about your builds, then you'll be happy to know that single block construction is a thing within the game. You can add and remove materials one block at a time, and this really looks to aid the player when trying to create very specific designs. On the flip side, there are also prefabs for players that don't have the time or imagination to dream up their survival home one brick at a time. Through all of this though, what's most impressive, at least to me, about the building is that even after massive manipulation, things still look organic, like they belong in the world, and that's something very few games have managed to do. Considering the visual quality of a game like Enshrouded, it's easy to see how building could become a standout feature of the game, just like it was for Valheim. While gathering and crafting are huge aspects of Enshrouded, it's hard to argue that at the center of the gameplay experience are the adventure elements. I wanted to point out that while it does play a lot like a survival game, Enshrouded leans much more into the action-adventure side of things, and the main reason for that is the lack of hunger, thirst, and the need for sleep, at least not in the traditional survival sense. Your character has multiple buff slots that you can augment based on the actions that you take. For example, eating some cooked food might give you an increase in stamina or health regeneration for a period of time. Likewise, sleeping also provides you with a buff. These aren't terribly long, but they are important, especially in the early parts of the game, if you plan on jumping directly into the Shroud. Systems like this move beyond simply checking a box. They provide meaningful benefits, and while that might not mean much once we're geared to the teeth, in the early game, this is going to be huge. I think it's also worth pointing out that the gameplay doesn't seem to change much based on the time of day, another classic experience of traditional survival games. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and with access to only a small portion of the game, it's possible we just didn't get to experience how the day-night cycle impacts gameplay. Again, I think this is something the team could definitely evolve as early access development continues. I could easily see creatures from the Shroud attacking players' bases at night and turning base building into base defending. There's definitely a few different directions the team could take this based on player feedback, but the groundwork is certainly there. What also makes Enshrouded more action-adventure than survival is the use of an RPG-style skill tree system. As players defeat enemies and level up, they get points that they can then use to unlock various nodes. During the demo, the tree was largely incomplete, but players did have the option to lean into mage, ranger, or warrior-based skills. Again, this is where early access development is going to play a huge role in the success of the game. There are skills like Blink, which change the nature of the evade mechanic, replacing it with a teleport, and if the team can continue to build in skills that give players access to new mechanics and playstyle enhancements rather than just passive buffs, I think it could have the potential to shape the gameplay in a fantastic way. Couple that with crafting items that aid the player, such as the much-touted glider, which gives players the ability to traverse from high elevations to lower elevations without taking fall damage, and you can start to see how all the systems will work together. That's honestly what I think is the most important thing about a game like Enshrouded on day one. You don't need to have all the bells and whistles figured out for the early access launch, but making sure that all the pieces work together is crucial to keep players engaged, even if it's only for a period of time before they run out of things to do. That being said, a first impression is everything, so having those systems all work hand in glove on day one is going to be huge. What we haven't touched on up until this point is combat, and I think this is one of the things that'll end up defining the Enshrouded experience. I've mentioned that Enshrouded feels more like an adventure game, and the combat is where you'll really start to feel that. Things are relatively simple, with players having access to a number of weapons during the early access launch, including swords, axes, bows, wands, and magical staves. Blending melee and ranged combat, players can tackle challenges as they see fit, and that all pieces together nicely with the game's co-op structure, which allows for up to 16 players on the same server. The action itself is straightforward, with combat boiling down to dodging, parrying, and attacking. Most weapons, melee in particular, have a few simple animations that string together, but as you unlock skills, this does enhance the action quite a bit. Ultimately, I think players will find that the combat is simple to start and a bit more engaging as skill progression occurs. It's clear to me the team is again building a foundation. The developers, Keen Games, also created Portal Knights, and you can easily draw a few parallels between the two games. Simple doesn't necessarily mean bad, and I want to make sure that's clear because if you watch other videos from people who have played the demo, what they talk about is the pacing of the action, which by and large, people enjoyed. Ahead of Enshrouded's early access release, I think it's safe to say there are a lot of people excited about the game. It's currently the 12th most followed upcoming game on SteamDB and ranked number 8 for Steam wishlists, and that is saying something. Personally, what I'm most excited about is the building. Having the freedom of a voxel world that looks as good as Enshrouded does is going to make for some truly epic builds, and that's something I can't wait to see more of post-launch. I also think the team is building a solid foundation. There's not a lot of bells and whistles at this point, and that's okay, because over the course of early access, I think the right systems are being established to allow the team to scale Enshrouded as big as they want. I, for one, cannot wait to check out Enshrouded. In fact, there are a ton of awesome games coming out in 2024, and we've taken the time to map out the entire year for you. So if you're wondering what's coming down the pike, check out our biggest games of 2024 video already released on the channel. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.